What's up guys, it's your boy Scrappy here, and in this video I'll be discussing the differences between classic and linear, the pros and cons of each, and any settings recommendation that I have for you guys based on the player that you are. So without further ado, let's get it. Bam 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 bam. So if you guys didn't already know, I recently switched to 4-4 linear with no dead zone, and I've been on this current sense for about a couple weeks now. Before this I was on 4-4 linear with small dead zone, and I was on those settings for about a couple months. And before that I actually messed around with AOCs for a few months, and then lastly before that for 3 years out of 4 years of Apex I was on 7-6 classic with no dead zone. I've tried all the major settings at this point, I've mastered them all. Now it's time to give you guys my insight and opinions on classic versus linear. Let it be known that classic should always be recommended for players that are beginning their journey with Apex. On the contrary, linear is going to be meant for players that are a little bit more advanced with the game, typically for players that have spent more time playing Apex. And that's a simple breakdown between the two. Now let's start off with classic. Like I mentioned, I recommend classic for players that are beginning with Apex. This is because it's a lot more forgiving. With slower input speeds, it'll give you a lot more control at the medium to long distance ranges. And when you're up close and personal, your crosshairs will literally stick to the enemy, giving you the illusion of more aim assist. Now let's quickly go over linear. Linear, as stated in the settings, is going to be your raw input, and unlike classic, which has a ramp up time, which essentially means the further you move your stick to the left or to the right, the faster it'll accelerate. You could think of classic as a 0 to 60 test with cars. Unlike classic, linear moves at a constant rate, and that's exactly what they mean by raw input. Whether you make smaller changes or larger changes with your thumb movement, with linear, your camera will always move at the same speed, giving you much more control over your micro aim. These micro adjustments that you're able to make with linear will help you a lot more with tracking, but on the downside will make it a little bit more difficult to hit your shots from medium to long distance ranges. Now that we have a better understanding of the two types of response curves, allow me a chance to talk about my feelings about each one. Like I said, I played on classic for 3 years and I never once complained about it, but since moving to PC, it became difficult for me to track people while they're strafing in close range, especially considering that I was playing on 7-6. I could have started playing a lower classic, but I wanted something that was going to give me a little bit more fluidity, and so I went to linear. Overall, I've only been on linear for a few months now, but the progress that I've made is insane, especially on PC in the higher rank lobbies. Linear makes my tracking so smooth at close range, and I'm able to keep up with the crazy movement players that are on PC. And even at longer ranges where I've struggled the most, I may never get back to where my long range shots were on classic, but I'm getting pretty damn close to it on linear. And overall, I definitely have to say that linear is going to be a lot more rewarding for you advanced players out there. If I had to give them a rating, again just my opinion, I'd have to give classic a 7 out of 10, and I'd have to give linear a 9 out of 10. And again, of course, it's all relative because like I said, classic should be meant for beginners and linear should be meant for more advanced players. And so let's quickly go over the pros and cons of each one. I kind of already mentioned a few, but for classic the main pros are going to be better long distance shots, less manual labor, the game kind of just aims itself for you, and it's pretty damn consistent. Now the cons for classic are going to be, it's going to be a little bit harder for micro adjustments which are necessary for close range gunfights. That's kind of the only downside for classic, but it's a very big downside, and it may be the reason why you're losing a majority of your close range 1v1s. Now for linear. Some pros for linear are going to be, it's way better for micro adjustments, a lot better for tracking, and is better for quicker responses in your aim. Some cons for linear will be, it's a little bit more labor intensive, which means you have to have great thumb to mind connection, and for a lot of people this can be difficult. Another downside of linear is going to be for people with twitchy thumbs or people that lack that thumb to mind connection that I was just mentioning. Another con for linear is that it's difficult to control your aim at longer ranges. And of course, as we all know, with linear, you're going to have major stick drift on screen. And as you obviously can tell, there are a lot more cons with linear than for classic. And that reason right there alone is why I recommend classic for beginners and linear for advanced players. Because the more advanced player will have the skills and tricks that will help alleviate the downside effects of linear. But the payoff is much more rewarding. And if you guys can get used to it, I highly recommend linear over classic. My aim has been absolutely insane. And once I get completely used to linear, this will be the best aim that I've ever had in my life in 4 years of Apex. And lastly, let's quickly go over some settings that I recommend based on the kind of player that you are. If you are a new player, then I recommend 4-3 or 4-4 classic with no dead zone. As a side note, you should never ever be using dead zone, small or large, when using classic. Classic already kind of has a built-in dead zone, so if you turn that up to more than it needs to be, you're going to have a really difficult time with aiming, tracking, and your micro adjustments. So even if you start to get a little bit of stick drift, if you're on on Classic, you should never turn up your dead zone. If, of course, you try 4-3 Classic and it's a bit too slow for you, then try bumping it up to 4-4. Now, if you're more of an advanced player, then I recommend 4-4 linear with no dead zone. But if 4-4 is a little too fast for you, then I definitely recommend 4-4 linear, still with no dead zone. Now, if you're a player that tries out linear for the first time with no dead zone, and you start to experience that stick drift that I'm talking about, and it's really throwing you off, then you can get away with using small dead zone. But I tried that out for a couple months, and that's kind of similar to just playing on Classic. It really defeats the whole purpose of using linear. So you could try it out and get back to me, see how you like it, but I definitely recommend no dead zone over everything. For the advanced player, yes, you're going to have stick drift when you're idle, but when you're actively aiming at somebody, it really doesn't exist. Linear is kind of like aimbot. It's crazy. If you are a player that has twitchy thumbs, then I do not recommend linear, and I recommend you play Classic, even if you're more of an advanced player. Now, if you're somebody that has great control over the thumbs and you play on Classic, then I recommend you try to make that transition into linear, as it'll pay off a lot in the end. Now, if you're a console player, you could try out linear if you like, but when everybody in that lobby is using 3-3 Classic on 70 FOV, maximizing their 0.6 aim assist, I recommend you probably stick with Classic. You're kind of making it very difficult on yourself by playing on linear while you're on console, fighting an entire lobby that's all on Classic. Now, if you're on PC and you're playing in the higher ranks, I definitely recommend linear. The higher up in the ranks that you go, you'll start to fight players with crazy movement, and linear is a perfect counter to all of that. That allows you to keep up and track that movement perfectly fine while ADS. In order to track that kind of movement while on Classic, you're going to have to go from an ADS to a hip fire to be able to keep up with that movement, and that can be especially difficult nowadays due to all the hip fire nerfs that ARs and SMGs have received. In summary, I think that linear is far more beneficial in long term, especially for more advanced players, but it will take some time to master. Classic definitely has its benefits, especially for new players, but in regards to long-term success, I think linear is more rewarding and will be more beneficial to you as a player than Classic ever could be. So please try to hear me out. This is coming from a 3-year Classic player. It's no wonder that all the pro players in Apex that are on controller are starting to transition to linear right now. At the end of the day, play what's most comfortable to you. These are just my thoughts and opinions on both response curves, which hopefully gives you guys a little bit more clarity on the subject. If you haven't already, then please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. What are you doing if you haven't subbed to me yet? If you're watching all my videos, might as well hit that sub button and get me to 40,000 subs. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys right now. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bam, 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 bam. Bam, 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 bam. Bam, 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 bam. Bam, 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 bam.